Alright, let me ask you a question. But first, let's back up. Let's back up 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, 500 years, 1,000 years, 5,000 years, 10,000 years, 20,000 years, and stop. Alright, now picture this. You wake up one morning, you step outside, and it seems that somebody forgot to wake up the sun. Or perhaps one day it's raining and it's stormy out, and your young child asks you, hey, what's going on with this loud noise, and why is there always this flashing? And he's noticeably scared, and honestly, probably you are too. How would you explain that? How would you explain that then? Heck, how would you explain it now? How would you explain it today? Do you actually know what causes lightning? I mean, we all have a rough idea, but really, what actually is happening? Now imagine 20,000 years ago trying to explain rainbows and rain and tornadoes and earthquakes and death and birth and even dreams and nightmares. How would you do that? Well, there's always been things that we just can't really explain. And today, we have it pretty simple. We just pull out our phone and we Google it, or we hop online and we Google it. And we just see what the latest scientist has said, or even just theorist has said. But now let's jump back again, 20,000 years. Well, I mean, obviously there was no Google, and there's no Bill Nye, no science guy, no Stephen Hawking. With no scientists, we'd probably sit down with our child and tell them what we believe, which frankly would probably be that, oh, well, you see, the sky is angry. That's why it's making all these loud sounds. And we'd explain that because that's what we would understand, that's what we know. And you can really only explain something that you know about. That means that 20,000 years ago, any attempt to explain anything, any natural events, would have to be from something that we were familiar with. And frankly, the only things that people were familiar with about 20,000 years ago was essentially themselves, which leads to them using a lot of different animism and anthropomorphism to explain natural events. All right, well, what is animism? What does that even mean? Simply put, it's looking at nature as though it was alive. It's imagining that the trees have feelings, or that the wind is alive. Now, anthropomorphism is a little more tricky, just like it's trickier to say. It's essentially projecting human emotions onto nature or items that are not inherently alive. For example, you can think of like the man in the moon, or even in our example, like there's thunder in the sky, it means that the sky must be angry. Or simply I'm sure we all as kids, we had our favorite toy, and we imagined that that toy was alive and had feelings and would talk to us. Well, we're natural born anthropomorphizers. I mean, even just think about Toy Story. Toy Story is all about toys who have human emotions. It's all about anthropomorphism. All right, well, that's one way that people have used to explain the unexplainable. Another way is to imagine that everything has a spirit, and that can even go into a little bit of animism, is to imagine that things are alive, imagine that things have breath. Is to believe that from humans to plants, from the ocean to the mountains, that all things have a spirit in them. Now, the word spirit is actually derived from the Latin root to breathe. Breathing is what gives us life. It is the breath that gives us life. What people would do to explain dreaming often was to believe that when they were sleeping, their spirit would often leave their body, and in a sense it would go to the spirit world. And that's why sometimes they would meet a friend that they haven't seen in a while, who maybe lived far away, or even they would meet a friend or a family member who had passed away, who had died. And so they believed that they could communicate with those spirits in their spiritual state, which is a state when their spirit leaves their body. And now that also explains dying in your sleep. Your spirit wasn't able to find its way back to the body. I imagine there were times that sleeping could often be a bit of a scary thing. It's thinking that, well, you might not wake up in the morning. And so frighteningly, your spirit leaving your body at night is, and going on walkabout, as they say, is is a way that you can explain dreams and even nightmares. Because with this understanding, anything that you can imagine, it must be real. And so that means that spirits and fairies and demons and giants and monsters and even some gods, they were all real because someone had imagined them. Someone had met them in a spirit world. So now, if everything has a spirit, then in theory, then that means that you could actually communicate with essentially everyone. This leads us into the realm of magic. Because under the right circumstances, you could communicate with spirits and you could have them do your will. And now, this leads to some issues because when someone is altruistic and trying to do things for all good reasons, that would be a good thing to be able to speak with the rain spirits or the fire spirits and tell them that we need more rain or less rain, or I need this fire to start, or we need this fire to stop. However, that also opens the door for people to use magic for evil. And now we can talk about magic more in a different video, but for today's purposes, magic is just another way that our ancestors believe that they could have some control over the world and some control over their fate, is that they could in some way be able to communicate with the spirit and be able to influence it in a way to do its own will. And now, I imagine most of us have done a rain dance at some point in our life to either make it rain more or make it rain less. I always liked rain as a kid, and so I always remember doing rain dances in hopes that we could get a thunderstorm, because I always just thought those were really exciting. We've always sought to understand the world around us, whether that be through animism, anthropomorphism, magic, religion, or philosophy or science. Those are all common ways that we've used to understand the world around us, and there are many more. And we'll talk about all those in this video series of the origins of psychology and philosophy. There's a quotation from Waterfield, and it says, "In a sense, science is as much a myth as anything else. It is the framework or model designed to explain and form reality for those who accept it." Think about that. In today's age, 2022, we believe in science. We believe that science explains everything, and there are many people who still believe in religion, as I do. I believe science and religion go hand in hand, but there are some people who simply just believe in science or just believe in religion. Now, as crazy as it may seem for us to believe that the Greeks actually believed in many different gods on Mount Olympus, or that the Egyptians believed in all these different gods, well, that's a very reasonable thing for them to believe, just because that's how they understood the world. And we're going to talk a lot more about that in the next few episodes.